Welcome to How Brands Are Built, where branding professionals get into the details of what they do and how they do it. I'm your host, Rob Meyerson. Thanks for listening. Just like every other episode in Season 4, today's episode is brought to you by SquadHelp, the world's #1 naming platform. It's June 2021, a little more than a year since the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And if you're wondering what that has to do with a podcast about branding, let me explain. In early 2020, I had a plan for Season 4 of How Brands Are Built, but in the wake of George Floyd's murder and protests around the world, my plan changed a bit. 2020 was already a pretty awful year for most people, and it just seemed to be getting worse and worse. So I started thinking about whether there was a way I could use this little platform of mine to do some good, or at least talk about something positive. That led me to reach out to my most diverse set of guests yet, starting with Dr. Jason Chambers, who talked about the origins of racist brand names and what to do about them. I talked to female agency founders like Dava Guthmiller of Noise 13, Bonnell of Motto, and Emily Heyward of Red Antler about how they got started and the role of diversity in their agency cultures. The season ended with a 2-part episode featuring Brian Collins and his agency's design apprentice, Diego Segura, who told me about one way to create opportunities for talented but less privileged designers and strategists. And along the way, I talked to Armin Vit of Brand New, Alina Wheeler, author of Designing Brand Identity, and Nirm Shanbhag of Sid Lee. While I talked to guests about their agencies, books they'd written, or other topics specific to their areas of expertise, I also asked nearly all of them about what brands and branding professionals could be doing to improve the state of the world, in light of COVID-19, in light of racial injustice, and just in general. Are brands a force for good? Can they be? Should they even try to be? In this episode, based on what I heard and what I learned this season, I'll share 5 ways brands and branding professionals like you and me can, sorry to say it, make the world a better place. I'll get to that in a minute, but first, a few housekeeping notes. First off, thank you to all my guests this season and to you for all you do to support this show, listening, subscribing, leaving a rating and a review, engaging on social media and the blog, and signing up for the newsletter. Second, this is the final episode of Season 4. You may have noticed the pace of episodes slowed significantly toward the end of this season. There were a number of reasons for that, one of which is that producing a podcast is hard and time-consuming. I'm not complaining. I started this podcast simply because I wanted to, and it's been an amazing experience. But I also have client work to do, not to mention other side projects, including a book I've just finished writing. More on that soon. In order to maintain some balance, I'll be hitting pause on the podcast, for a little while at least. I may drop the occasional audio recording into this feed, whether it's from something like the Big Brand Debate or my appearance on someone else's podcast. But in terms of a Season 5, that's TBD, and I don't expect it anytime soon. If you've been a listener since the beginning, I can't thank you enough. I wasn't sure anyone would ever tune into a podcast about branding, and I've been overwhelmed by the positive response. So thank you, and I hope we can find other ways to stay in touch online. With that, let's talk about how brands and branding professionals can do good in the world. Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's, and the Washington NFL football team. These brands and others announced they'd change their names or mascots in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the ensuing protests for racial justice. A year later, Aunt Jemima is Pearl Milling Company, Uncle Ben's is Ben's Original, and the Washington football team is the Washington football team, pending another new name change coming sometime soon-ish. I asked Dr. Jason Chambers, Associate Professor of Advertising at the University of Illinois, what might be a bit of an ignorant question. Where do these brand names come from? Why do these racist brand names exist to begin with? Here's his response.
I think a couple of reasons. Symbols are simply shorthand, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like a logo or a trade character. It's a way for consumers to recognize my brand in the marketplace without me having to take, 6, 8, 10, 12 paragraphs. If we think about when these symbols were created back in the world of print advertising, even before radio becomes a thing. So these symbols become shorthand. The stereotype about the group of people for which the symbol is being utilized, in this case, African Americans. Well, even within all of the racist tropes that have existed about African Americans then or now, there are certain areas at which African Americans are stereotyped to be good at, right? Stereotyped to be expert at. Right? If we just kind of sat back and just off the top of our head listed stereotypes about African Americans, well, they're good at sports, particularly basketball. They're fast. They're tall. They're good dancers. They're good at music. So we could list categories of life or areas of operation the stereotype, though it exists and is racist in aspects of it are racist in and of themselves, are taken to be perceived to be good at. Right. Sports and the like. Cooking, if you turn the clock back to the early 20th century, late 19th century, cooking would have been one of those for African Americans as well. Right. I see. They're good cooks. Right. So you combine that stereotype of good cook and expertise and service and authenticity and quality. Well, if I've got a quality cook who has a recipe for pancakes, and we've been able to mirror that recipe in the box, and then we surround that in the wrapper of an old black mammy in the old South who served her famous pancake recipe to not quite the slave owner, because at the time it's created, slavery is over, but this kind of white master in the old South kind of model. Well, that stereotype, that sense of authenticity, that sense of quality that's conveyed in that idea, it's conveyed to the brand itself. And then we wrap the rest in the story of, kind of the old South and all of that kind of foolishness. And then you can see the same thing for other brands, Land O'Lakes, butter and margarine. If we want to convey the quality of our ingredients, well, we utilize this Native American image, because who are the people that are closest to the land and the greatest, really typify this sense of authentic connection to manufacture and the making of an agricultural product. Right. Well, I can simply use Native Americans to convey that kind of natural imagery, this kind of connection that I want to make.
I also asked Dr. Chambers why these names hadn't changed sooner. His response pretty much came down to money and inertia, but I didn't ask him how brands can avoid naming mistakes like this going forward. A big part of the answer, however, is diversity. Diversity in the team coming up with the names, diversity in the people vetting the name ideas, and so on. So let's talk about diversity a bit. When I interviewed Sunny Bonnell of Motto, I was shocked by a statistic she cited. According to Sunny, 0.1% of all creative agencies are owned by women. I asked her to talk about the importance of diversity on an agency team.
When you meet our team at Motto specifically, there's one thing that you pick up on immediately, and that's that we're very different from one another. Some of us grew up under democracy, others under dictatorship. We were born into privilege and disadvantage, into cities and onto farms, into enough and into never enough. We identify as female and male, a blend of both, maybe neither. We've got fur babies, we've got human babies. We're just we've got folklorists with MBAs and logisticians who are artists. Some of us kind of roam the streets of New York, and others, may tuck themselves away into a forest. But what I've learned is that sameness only breeds sameness, and we need more people who don't nod their heads in agreement. We need Black leaders. We need more women at the top. It's really time to shatter templates and shed the old guard. And that's how you get different perspectives to get a seat at the table.
Dava Guthmiller, founder of Noise 13, agreed that there are too few female-led agencies, although she says it's gotten better since she started Noise 20 years ago. Dava's agency has a diverse team, but I also talked to her about a conference she's created, Invisible Talks. And we started talking about how speakers are selected for the event to ensure it's not just a bunch of white men on stage. It was interesting to hear because even if you're looking to host a diverse event or hire a diverse team, it's not like you can just snap your fingers and make it happen. Here's what Dava said about the process of finding speakers.
One of the things that we do in the beginning when we're sort of kicking off the project is that we sort of put together this list, right? So like all the time you're meeting people, hearing about creatives that you want to meet, that you want to talk to, that are doing great things. And we just put this huge spreadsheet together. And we had to start actually putting their background, right? Their ethnicity, to make sure that we were having a representative set of people. And, we also, part of that spreadsheet also looks at their age, and we do not have, we need to have one Asian person and one Black person and one, we don't do that at all.
I'm glad David talked a little bit about the how of creating diversity, because it's one thing to want a diverse agency team, but wanting it doesn't make it real. And I'm sure you've heard this before. People say they want to add diversity to their team, but they couldn't find a Black designer or couldn't find any women with the right experience for the job, and so on. Well, Collins, the design agency led by Brian Collins in New York, came up with a great solution. They created an internship program to educate young designers who can't afford the biggest, most prestigious schools, as well as a summer internship for high school students of color. Here's Diego Segura, design apprentice at Collins, on why that's important, based on his personal experience.
I had no idea at 16, 17 years old what SVA was, RISD, Art Center. I had no idea. Parsons, these were not on my radar.
Yeah.
The only thing that was on my radar was the guidance counselor saying, hey, you have pretty good grades. You could get into a lot of great schools and you're automatically accepted into UT, all that stuff, the standard college stuff coming out of high school. I had no idea that these things were available. So it's funny that when I was out of high school for a year already, joining Collins, people said, well, why didn't you go to art school? I said, to be completely frank, I made my dropout decision before I knew any of those things existed. I didn't know you could go to school really for design, which sounds stupid, but it just wasn't, I wasn't thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the broader industry, I would venture to guess that the people who get into design somehow were made aware of it. Well, obviously they were made aware of it at one point. And I would guess that a lot of lower income high schools, for example, the high school I went to was the lowest income in our district. We weren't made aware of those things maybe as much as we could have been or should have been. And so it's a clear discrepancy between going to a wealthy school where, oh yeah, my friend is the director of marketing. My friend's mom is the director of marketing at some massive corporation. And so they're aware of that.
Emily Heyward, co-founder and chief brand officer of Red Antler, also said our industry has a very long way to go on diversity. But because Red Antler has so much clout in the branding industry right now, I also talked to Emily about her agency's ability to influence clients on issues like diversity and inclusion. And in answering, she again made a point about why diversity is important in any organization.
We do play a role. So one is that, we're much, much more likely to get flexible when it comes to taking on a project if it has, a founder from a diverse background, whether that be a woman, a person of color, both, that's where we're like, make this work because we are in a position where we can really help businesses succeed. And we want to see more people succeeding who don't just look like, your typical startup founder profile. Yeah. So that's one. Two is that, when we do have a team of all men, I often find that my role is to sort of be a reality check for them. I think that part of the problem of having, a not diverse team is that you have blind spots, right? Everybody does. It's no one's fault, but you're going to be in a room all talking and think something's a good idea. And someone else could very easily spot that it's not a good idea. But if you don't have that person at the table, you run the risk of like putting the thing out there that everyone's like, what the hell were they thinking? So, we're often in the position of being like, okay, guys, like maybe we should rethink this. That might not be the best idea, especially coming from an all male team. And you might want to think about that in a different way.
And that gets us to a major way branding people can do good, by picking the right clients. If your job is to help your clients succeed, then it makes sense to choose clients that align with your values. Here's a little bit of my conversation with Armin Vit of Under Consideration and the website Brand New about choosing clients carefully.
Where we can make a difference is who we make that work for. Because we're making that work for people, for companies, for organizations, for products and services that can make a difference in the world, a positive difference in the world. So we empower those clients to be their best, to communicate clearly, to do it engagingly, to do it in a way that is memorable, that sticks in people's minds. So I think that's when we see our industry to be in service of other people who are making a difference in the world. I think that can be really empowering, and it's important to choose who you work for. And I'm not saying like all your work has to be for nonprofits or for NGOs or for people saving the world. You can do work for profit, for companies, as long as it's not, I don't want to name companies, but
right. But you're just advising people to have their own values and ideals in mind, and not just doing the work to do the work. I mean, some people, I suppose, are in a position where they can't afford to turn work down, and that's one thing. But I like what you're saying, that the power of designers and consultants and agencies is a lot of it is in simply selecting which clients to work for and which ones to kind of let pass. If you just feel like, well, I don't really like what they're doing, or I don't agree with what they stand for, then you have the power to just not help them and let them go on their way.
Yeah, and I think having that sense at the end of the night that you help someone be their best version of themselves. And by someone, I don't mean a person, but like an entity to communicate in the best way possible. And I think that's a really valuable job. It's just not going to save the world.
That idea, that branding won't save the world, was echoed by Nirm Shanbhag, Chief Strategy Officer of Sidley USA.
At the end of the day, I've said this before, and you've probably heard me say it a million times, but like there has never been a brand emergency. Like the stuff we do, at the end of the day, it's just about brands. It's constructs. It's helping people make choices.
Yeah.
And while important, I think it pales in comparison to like the discovery of elemental particles.
Nirm mentioned elemental particles because it came up after I'd asked him about his favorite books. He recommended A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking because it's a book about perspective. While we were getting philosophical, I asked Nirm directly whether he thinks branding is good or bad for society.
Is brand good or bad? That's hard to answer because I don't think of brand as something that is inherently good or bad. Like, is a hammer good or bad?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're driving a nail into a wall, a hammer's a good thing. If beaten over the head by your crazy neighbor, it's a bad thing. And so I think the brand isn't any different than any other tool that human beings have constructed. Sure, it's not physical, but still it's a thing. And, I think there are examples of brand being used for bad. There's certainly clients I've had where I didn't necessarily agree in the end with their business practices. On the other hand, you can have brands that are exist solely to improve things.
This episode of How Brands Are Built is brought to you by SquadHelp, the world's #1 naming platform. Here's how SquadHelp works. You launch a naming contest to engage hundreds of naming experts. You're guided through an agency-level naming process that goes beyond traditional crowdsourcing. The platform uses AI and includes name validation features such as audience testing, trademark validation, linguistic analysis, and quality scoring. And SquadHelp doesn't just do naming. You can also use their platform for taglines or slogans, as well as logo design. To launch your naming contest today, go to squadhelp.com and start receiving custom name suggestions instantly. SquadHelp, company, brand, and business name ideas by experts. But what about this buzzword, purpose, brand purpose? Well, I won't get into the strategic value of brand purpose right now, but let's agree that a business can have a purpose beyond making money, and that organizations are made up of people who have values, maybe even shared values. So, as Nirm said, if branding is a tool, it can be used to clarify and amplify that purpose and those values. Again, it's why picking the right clients is so important. Here's Sunny Bonnell of Motto again, talking about how leaders and leading brands can make an impact. And she even gives an example.
Brands have huge influence. Many of them that I've seen recently being extremely tone deaf with the pandemic, but that's another topic. But I absolutely believe that leaders can use that influence to stand for something, not just sell something, and make a positive impact on the planet and the people living on it. And they should, because why on earth would anyone have a problem with businesses doing good? I can't stand the argument personally that there's no place for politics and social opinions and keep it strictly business. A lot of people kind of you have this ethos like stay in your lane. Well, I just say fuck the lane. For rare breeds, there is no lane. And I think that we are, brands can inherently be good or bad. I mean, look at Oatly, they are a huge business. I think they're valued at like $2 billion and fucking fearless. They took what used to be an invisible brand and turned it into a lifestyle brand by doing their own thing, having guts, sticking to their convictions, and really going against the norms of traditional marketing. It's not something you drink. It's something you believe.
But if branding is a tool, like Nirm said, what are some examples of it being used by the dark side? I asked Sunny about this in a follow-up question.
We're seeing it all the time. I mean, there's a lot of these brands. Ashley just wrote a post on LinkedIn that took off, and it was about she was talking about how big brands had responded to the assassination of George Floyd and these with sort of anti-racist messages. And what she said was Zillow, in their I think in a post that they did, it says racism has no home here, and we said apparently neither do Black people on your leadership team. Right. Nike, don't pretend there's not a problem in America. Well, how about not pretend that there's not a problem in your C-suite?
Right.
There's a lot of these. I believe there's like maybe less than 5% of Fortune 100 companies that have Black people at the top. This is a conversation about business and money and power. And there's not equality and representation in business right now. And I think you're seeing it even with, to other brands that are aligning to the dark side. You have companies that align and celebrate on the light side. And I think it's just the conversation that's out there is like some of these brands, they are rooted in some evil practices.
To be clear, I don't think Sunny's saying Zillow and Nike are evil brands overall. But in this one example, they're using part of the branding tool, let's call it messaging, to glom onto social justice movements and espouse values that they can't back up very well in practice. And that, I suppose, is a form of evil, or negligence at least, to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's hear a few more examples of how branding, design specifically, can make a positive impact on people's lives. Here's Brian Collins talking about a point in his career when he went from leading the Levi's business at Footcone Belding to starting a design and innovation division for Ogilvy.
When I arrived for my interview and I walked into this huge lobby on 49th Street and 8th Avenue, it was a giant Skidmore, Owings and Merrill building and a very intimidating lobby that was like, 100 stories tall, covered with Italian marble. The lobby was, it looked like what it was as a headquarters of a large global enterprise. But on the wall, there was this logo that said Ogilvy made it, and it was like in brass or bronze. And it kind of looked like a hip Lenin sort of mausoleum. It was head to toe, like Italian marble everywhere. It was very sort of mid-90s corporate Gothic. And Rick asked me to work with him on the redesign of the Ogilvy brand itself. And so we did. And so we changed the identity. One of the things we wanted to do is reassert David's relevance and thinking as we were moving into the 21st century. This is
David Ogilvy.
Yeah, David Ogilvy. This is 1998, 1999. And it turns out that many of Ogilvy's thoughts about branding, which he wrote in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, were even more timely now than they were when he first wrote them. So we wanted to reassert David's philosophy as a key part of the Ogilvy culture. The other thing we wanted to do is sort of reassert his personality. And so we went and got some of those old letters, and we pulled his signature from one of them, and we turned his signature into the logo of the company. Along with doing that, I remember walking down as we were doing design development identity. I walked in and I looked at the security guards, and they at Ogilvy, and there was a massive security desk. It was like the size of the runway at JFK. And there were like 4 security guards behind the desk. And they were always really kind, really nice, but they were dressed like attendants at the zoo. It was like marooned, textured polyester suits. Yeah. Really bad, spun polyester with this horrible maroon texture. They had gold piping along the shoulders and down the edges, and it said security on the front jacket pocket, and security on the left shoulder, and security on the right shoulder. They had black pants, a maroon jacket with black They were sort of flared pants. It was hideous. They looked awful. And they were embarrassed to wear them, and they had big clunky ties. And the women had to wear these ties, this outfit. See, it was awful. But we had apparently, I said, well, why don't we change those outfits? And Rick had explained that they had a contract with the security company. The security company supplied those outfits. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. Let's go and get better outfits for them. Let's get nice looking suits. So I went and I found out who made the suits for the Ritz-Carlton, for the Four Seasons. And we went out, worked with them, found an exquisite suit. It's beautiful, like thin lapels. We found a very elegant sort of crew neck, black. So this is the late 90s. So it was a black suit, black crew neck, black pants that was slightly pegged, and some nice shoes. And then both the men and women, we tried it on them, and they looked awesome. And I banished the word security. It didn't say security under pins. It said security nowhere. I remember one of the other executives had said, well, how do they know they're security guards? Well, maybe it's because they're behind the security desk. And it made no sense to me that they need
to say security on each sleeve.
Yeah, exactly, Rob. These were the diplomats. These are the first people who welcomed you as you came into the company. They greeted you. They said hello. They asked who you were speaking to. They asked how they could be of help. They told you which office to go to. They called ahead. They pointed you to the elevators. They asked if you needed anything. They're our first voice to people when they visited us at our New York head. And I remember when they first tried them on, and they really liked them, and they looked like $1 million. I mean, it looked great. It looked like you're walking to the lobby of like a 5-star hotel, which is, David Ogilvy said we run first class business in a first class way, and our lobby now looked like a entry into like a first class hotel, which made sense. A month after we relaunched the brand, and a month after. Everything happened at the same time. The identity changed, the website changed, and all the uniforms of the security guards in New York changed. And about a month after that, one of the security guards who'd worked at the company for at least 15 years came up to me and he pulled me aside and he said, "Brian, can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "I have to tell you something." He said, "This for the first time in my life, my daughter called and she said, 'I'm coming by to see you.' And I took my daughter out. I walked her outside. She hadn't seen me in that outfit. And I took her down to the Starbucks and we had coffee in the Starbucks. And for the first time, I felt like I worked at Ogilvy and Mather. I didn't feel like I was just a security guard. And it changed my relationship with my daughter, that I wasn't wearing an ugly, hideous security outfit.
I didn't have to be embarrassed about it anymore.
Being a security guard is a good job. But he felt, because of the way he was dressed, he felt like he was part of the culture, not just a contracted employee.
Right.
Because the agency provided him with a suit that made him look great. And he got a little emotional in telling me this. I saw my relationship with my daughter change because I could take her out in public, and she was going out with her dad, who worked for Ogilvy, rather than her dad, who was a contract security guard. And all that changed was a suit.
Yeah.
And so that's a very small thing. Of all the things I did at Ogilvy and Mather, that's the story about that I'll never forget.
What a great story from Brian Collins. So let's recap. Based on all my conversations with my guests this season, I've boiled everything down to 5 ways brands and brand consultants can make a positive impact on the world. 1, be selective and stick to your values. 2, walk the talk. 3, wield your influence. 4, proactively pursue diversity. And 5, don't underestimate the power of your work. I'll break these down one by one. Be selective and stick to your values. I think it's right, at least in this context, to think of brand as a tool, as Nirm said, that on its own is morally neutral, but that can be used to advance good, neutral, or bad causes. Put simply, one purpose of branding is to get the message out. Usually the message is, buy our product. But of course, it can be more than that. Recently, due to shifts in consumer expectations and events in the world, brands seem to have a lot more to say, and many align themselves with ideas ranging from environmental sustainability to outspoken support for a political party. Armin Vit and others reminded us that as consultants, we get to choose which brands we help strengthen, assuming we're in a position to be picky, that is. So stick to your values and choose wisely. By the way, The same logic applies to brands looking to enter co-branding relationships with other brands. Walk the talk. It's not enough for brands to say the right things, though. Sunny Bonnell reminded us that some brands want to associate themselves with racial equality, for example, but don't seem to be working toward it inside their own organizations. So look beyond the romance copy and Instagram posts. When you're making decisions about whether to support or work with a brand, do your homework. And again, stick to your values. Wield your influence. Emily Heyward made the point that beyond being selective about our future clients, we can often influence our current clients in ways that align, again, with our values, and hopefully theirs too. We've been invited into these organizations to help make them better, and sometimes that means encouraging them to take action. Maybe that means cutting energy use or hiring more diverse talent. Maybe it just means producing a higher quality product or putting an end to a somewhat annoying email campaign. Even these little changes could positively impact many people's lives. Even if you want to be cynical about it and do it all under the guise of creating proof points for a recommended brand promise, who cares, as long as the positive changes get made. Proactively pursue diversity. From Dr. Chambers, we heard about one of the many things that can go wrong with an insufficiently diverse team. And Emily Heyward mentioned some challenges she's seen with all-male leadership teams. I won't go into all the benefits of diversity here. I feel like that case has been made already. What I liked about some of these conversations was hearing about how to pursue diversity, how to be proactive and thoughtful about it. Dava Guthmiller talked about something as simple as keeping track of the backgrounds of people she's inviting to speak at her conference. Not as a quota, not we need 3 black people and 3 white people, but just keeping track so you're conscious of how diverse or not diverse a group is. And Diego Segura talked about the internship program at Collins, which aims to create a pipeline of diverse talent. This is a great way to build diversity on the Collins team, but more importantly, it does a huge service to these high school kids and to the design industry overall. Lastly, don't underestimate the power of your own work. What did you take away from Brian Collins' story about redesigning the security team's uniforms? What I hope you took away is that your work, even when it might seem trivial, can make a huge impact. Whether you're a strategist, a designer, or some other kind of marketing professional, your work may make someone more proud to do their job. Or it could create new jobs, or help your clients get promoted. It might make someone try a product that they end up loving, or stop using a product that's bad for their health. Some of my most meaningful projects have been helping second or third generation business owners revitalize their family business, which, as you can imagine, is deeply meaningful to them on a personal level. It's part of why I named my agency Heirloom. So yes, branding is not the discovery of elemental particles. I don't want to pretend we're saving the world, saving lives, or that everything we do is good for the world, even. But I hope that you'll listen to this episode and Brian's story and realize that you can make an impact, that your work does make an impact. And if you think about being selective and sticking with your values, walking the talk, wielding your influence, and proactively working to ensure greater diversity, the impact you make will be a positive one. I'd like to leave you with one more clip from this season. Another question I often ask interviewees is about advice for people in the branding community. If you want to hear what people like Marty Neumeier, David Ocker, and others have to say about this, please go back and listen to their episodes or previous season wrap-up episodes. But today, I'm leaving you with this little bit of wisdom and inspiration from Alina Wheeler, author of Designing Brand Identity, a fantastic reference for anyone working in branding, now in its 5th edition. Here's a bit of my conversation with Alina.
Dream big, right? Put your big, audacious dreams on a Post-it note on your forehead and share them with everyone. Because sometimes some of the biggest opportunities come from the most unlikely places. Disengage from your digital devices and just, wander around some more and explore.
Yeah.
Expose your brain to things that have nothing to do with your day job. Do something crazy. Get rid of toxic people and clients.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you have an I believe in you person, especially when you're really stretching and coming up with big ideas.
Yeah.
Find a professional tribe, like I had AIGA.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just have to dream big. Like I never, ever, when I wrote this first edition, I never dreamt that I would have a week like this week. So this week, I have been contacted by a business owner in Barcelona, an entrepreneur in Bavaria, a brand strategist in India. I talked to Simon in Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to somebody who has a brand consultancy in Dubai. I mean, I never dreamt.
And you're doing the How Brands Are Built podcast, which is about as prestigious as it gets in the world of branding.
I love it. No, well, look at all the people you've interviewed. Oh my God, to be interviewed by the same person that did David Ocker a couple of weeks ago. Holy smokes. Yeah, you're right.
Well, I love your advice to dream big, and I love the fact that you're a living example of that, of doing that, and seeing how it can pay off. And I like, you said put it on your forehead. I like that idea of not only dreaming big but sharing it with people, because I suspect that a lot of people have these big dreams or ambitions or ideas, but maybe keep them to themselves, partly because they're afraid to share it because they think people might laugh at them or think that they can't achieve it. But by sharing it, not only are you making yourself accountable to some degree, people might follow up with you and say, hey, did you write that book, or did you do that big thing you thought you were going to do? But also, you never know where inspiration is going to come from, or potentially like a partner, somebody that wants to work on it with you. So the more you kind of get out there and connect with people and talk about these big ideas, I think the more likely they are to happen.
I think for me, when you write it down and you kind of put it on the wall,
mm-hmm.
it becomes real. When you talk to people, it becomes real. And I'm just always surprised about where possibilities are born and opportunities happen. So it's exciting. It's making the dream tangible, and it's bringing you one step closer. My favorite quote, again, another dead person that I quote in the book, is George Eliot. It's never too late to be who you could have been. So it's like start now, start today.
Well, that's it for this wrap-up episode and for Season 4. I hope this gave you a taste of this season's conversations, or a nice refresher if you listen to everything. To hear more from each of these amazing guests, go back and listen to each episode, or read the transcripts on howbrandsarebuilt.com. And if you don't already know, the website is not just a repository of podcast episodes. I also post original articles there, some written by me, some by others. There's a ton of content about brand strategy, naming, brand architecture, design, trademarks, you name it. Take a look. Thanks for listening today and for the past 4 seasons, and for leaving ratings and reviews, subscribing, signing up for the newsletter, and connecting on social media. It all helps support the show and the blog, and I appreciate all of it. How Brands Are Built is a production of Heirloom Agency, LLC. Our theme music is by Isha Erskine Project. I'm Rob Meyerson, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.